Okay, we are going live right now.
Morning, Chris. Uh-oh, I can't hear you. I know, it shows that you're not muted.
Yeah.
Let me log off and go back on.
Oh, no.
There you go.
We can hear you.
Okay.
There you go. Magic.
Happy
glad
day
you tried
before
that.
Easter weekend.
Yeah, happy Good Friday. Happy Good Friday. I can't wait to celebrate Easter next year.
Yeah.
But it looks like you're ready with your shirt today. It's very cute.
Yes, I'm being nice and springy. Good morning,
I tried
Marcy.
as well. I got flowers
Oh.
on my shirt.
Oh my gosh, I almost wore something similar. Tammy, were you able to make April a co-host?
Oh, let me try that right now.
That's for my just in case.
So the same thing that happened yesterday is happening right now. I'm only able to make April a host.
That's really odd.
That can be dangerous.
You never know. I'm
Oh,
not
good.
sure
There's
why
Mark.
that's the case.
Try to see about making Mark a co-host.
Try on Mark. Okay.
That just might be something we need to figure out with Zoom then.
Yeah, I'm having the same issue with Mark. I can only make him a
Okay.
host, not a co-host.
Can you make me the host for right now?
Yeah. Okay, Cindy, you should be the host.
Since I'm not the original host, why don't we go ahead and leave me we'll go ahead and leave me as host, and Mark and April, I think you're just going to have to give me direction on when to put something on the screen and where to advance it.
It appears that I'm able to share my screen.
Okay. April, you want to try as well?
Did that share my screen?
Okay. Oh,
sure
that's
did,
fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Great.
Okay, then we are golden. Okay. Tammy, I'm going to go ahead and make you back the host.
Okay.
And John, I will share the spreadsheet for you while you walk through numbers.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark.
Good morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock. I'm going to look to Cami here. And if you, I'm seeing just about everybody here. We've got a quorum. I'll look to Cami and see how you are set for getting rolling here. And if we need to get started, we have some introductory stuff to get through. So that'll give any final people coming on some time. How are you, Cami, for getting rolling here?
Okay. I'm looking pretty good. I see that we're still missing one council member, Councilmember Hall. But we are live.
My thought, if there's no objection, is we just get the meeting going. We have these introductory comments and some material to get through, which should give Councilmember Hall an opportunity to get on before we get into the discussion, unless there's any objection to that. And seeing none. Cami, if you're ready, I think I'll just get rolling, and then we'll let him come on when as we move forward here.
Yes, we can do that. Okay,
very good. So this is the City of St. Helena Special City Council meeting, Friday, April 2nd, 2021. And Cami will get us into the remote access and the Spanish language interpretation of this.
Oh, I will be talking about the remote access, but we actually are not offering Spanish interpretation for today.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen for public participation. Okay, so to participate in public comment today, you can dial by phone to phone number 669-900-6833, and at the prompt, enter the meeting ID as 896-4889-2117 and press pound. And during public comment, press *9 to speak.
Very good, thank you. And now we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. If folks would mute your microphones, I will, and follow with me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And then if we could have the roll call, please.
I see Councilmember Hall in the attendees, and I'm going to go ahead and promote him to a panelist. And then I'll go ahead and take roll call. Okay, so following up with roll call, Mayor Ellsworth.
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring.
Here.
Councilmember Shuteau.
Here.
Councilmember Hall.
Here.
And Councilmember Hardy.
Here.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Item 4 here is public comment. With this being a special meeting under California law, public comments at special meetings are limited to subjects on the agenda only. Therefore, public comment will take place during consideration of the item, and each person's comment shall be limited to 4 minutes. We do have one public comment letter that I'm seeing that has come in, and we'll go over that when we get to the item. So with that, we'll now move to the item of the day. This is new business, discussion and analysis of City of St. Helena water supply to assess need for establishing Phase 3 water regulations pursuant to St. Helena Municipal Code Section 13.04.250, provided 4/1/2021, 3:20 p.m. I'll pass it off to Mark Presswich in just a moment here. Very serious subject. It's going to take a lot of focus from a lot of different sides here, so we appreciate everybody's engagement on this, and I'll pass it off to Mark now.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mayor. Today's focus is on our water supply, and we'll be sharing with you some numbers as we went through recently to assess the potential need for establishing a Phase 3 water emergency. As you know, we're in a Phase 2 currently and have been monitoring this for since June of last year. In looking at the drought.gov website, Napa County, there are several different classifications for drought, and Napa County is considered to be 100% the entire county in a severe drought, and 90% of the county described as it within an extreme drought. So quite significant challenges locally and frankly across the southwestern United States. The Napa County has the February rainfall totals for Napa County were the 26th driest February in the past 127 years, and the rainfall to date places us at the 25th driest year-to-date figures in the last 127 years. This past month, we were more than 4 inches lower than normal just in the month of February. I want to outline the presentation today for us, but before I walk through that, I want to thank Councilmember Hall, who recently put together some numbers, did his own calculations on forecasting drought, was very concerned about the numbers he calculated, and I know other council members have been following this very closely and have been as concerned as Councilmember Hall, and have shared with me their own calculations and concerns. Clearly a severe challenge for the city. Some of Eric's methodology has been adapted for our presentation today. So thank you, Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mark.
The problem really stems from a number of factors. Rainfall, most significantly recently. Today, we're going to start with an overview of the analysis of the numbers. We'll walk through some spreadsheets that are attached to this report. Our interim city engineer, John Wanger, will provide that portion of the presentation. Then we're going to talk about water conservation. Water conservation is a significant strategy that our community has been practicing and will need to continue to practice as we move into the warmer months, the drier months. And then we're going to close with some comments from our finance director, April Mitz, who's going to walk us through the next steps on water penalties and preview our discussion of the April 13th council meeting. But rather than wait, this is a time where we're 3 weeks between a council meeting and we have the data now, and it's critical data. We wanted to take the time to meet with our council now and share the numbers with you and raise awareness within our community about our current challenges. We can't control the rainfall, but we can influence the outcome with conservation. And water conservation can help us avoid a phase 3 water emergency. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our interim city engineer, John Wanger. I'm going to share my screen for his presentation and we'll follow along with his comments. Thank you.
Mr. Wanger, I think you're muted.
That would be true. I'm sorry about that. Thank you, Mark, and good morning, Mayor and council members. First of all, this presentation would absolutely not be possible without Martine Beltran and Clayton Church's help. They did the majority of the work here, so I want to make sure to pass my thanks on to them and give them credit, as well as Councilmember Hall. I think your analysis gave us a great starting spot for continuing our analysis, and we really liked the way you presented information. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Just to explain a couple of things before we get into the spreadsheets. A few of the things that we have noted recently, excuse me, for the council and the public's information. As of the end of March, the available capacity of the reservoir at Bell Canyon leaves us approximately 466 acre feet available, which is a little bit more than the average, which is great. However, it's still in a critical situation. Stonebridge Wells, as of the end of March, there's approximately 90 acre feet of capacity remaining in the wells if we consider the 450 acre feet as the maximum yield of that well field. And for the city of Napa, as of the end of March, there's approximately 312 acre feet available from the city's allocation of 600 acre feet per year. The things that have contributed to the phase 1 and phase 2 water emergency declarations include the primary factors Mark's already touched on is the lack of rain. We've had back-to-back very dry years. We're not sure what the future is going to hold with respect to those dry years, but we want to put the city in the best possible scenario at the end of this calendar year to make sure that we're prepared for that if that in fact does occur. The second major impact was, of course, the fires that we experienced this last year. There was a lot of water that was used out of those fires, which is very atypical, obviously, in any given year. Of course, we have evaporation that occurs as well. And the nicer and warmer the weather is, the more that evaporation takes place. The criteria for consideration of a phase 3 water emergency includes looking at the volume of water anticipated to be available prior to November 1st from any potable water source, which includes our 3 primary water sources, the Bell Canyon, the Stonebridge wells, and the Napa pipeline. If that is not sufficient to meet projected demands through November 1st without reduction measures beyond phase 1 or 2, then it has to be implemented. Also, phase 2, in assessing the needs to impose a phase 2 restrictions, we went through and looked at the trigger system developed by the Safe Yield report that had been done in prior years. And based on that, last October, the city entered into the phase 2 water emergency. So Mark, if you could share your screen, and I'm going to walk you through the analysis that was done in the last week or so. And we looked at about 5 different scenarios. And the first of which is what we're going to show is just simply the 5-year running average of use by water source. And as you can see on the screen there, we have Bell Canyon Reservoir, the wells, and the Napa. So that shows the typical water use based on the last 5 years of average from 2016 through 2021. So if you can scroll down, Mark, that would be great. So what that scenario shows, if we look at all the averages, and we use water out of each one of the supplies based on averages. As you can see in that scenario, we get to the end of October, the end of September, and around October, we run out of available capacity in the Bell Canyon Reservoir. And one thing I do want to point out here, that when we show on this slide in front of you, when we show remaining supply, first of all, those numbers start at the end of March, but the remaining supply in Bell Canyon assumes that we maintain a 25% capacity in the reservoir to ensure that we're going to have sufficient water pressures and fire protection. So it doesn't mean that the reservoir is completely empty, but we have to maintain that emergency water pool for pressure and fire.
Mr. Wenger, I see Vice Mayor Doring with a hand up. I'm going to just interrupt briefly. And
just to make clarification here, are we assuming approximately 2,350 acre feet total capacity as a starting point, and then we take 25% of that number?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Thank you.
That's exactly right. So if bottom line, as I said, if we went through this scenario and we used each, both the Napa wells, the well field and the Napa pipeline, based on historic uses, we would be in a critical situation and we would run out of capacity in the Bell Canyon Reservoir. So Mark, if you can go to the optimizing Napa water scenario. So this is in this scenario, we looked at the same use of historical water rates, but what we decided to do is shift the use to minimize the amount taken out of Bell Canyon Reservoir and maximize the use of the water available in the Napa pipeline in the well field. And you can see in this scenario, on the Napa pipeline, we show 67 acre feet, which is currently the maximum amount that we can pull, that we can physically pull out of the Napa pipeline each month, as well as starting in July. You can see that we ramp up production to draw additional water out of the Stonebridge wells. And that in itself helps. But we get to the November 1st time frame and we're still in a very, very close situation with respect to Bell Canyon and the amount of available water. So beyond that, what we did is we looked at 3 different scenarios. One would be if we went through and were able to reduce 10% off of water consumption, another 20%, and another 30%. And each of these are going to show resulting Bell Canyon levels being slightly higher for each one by the end of the year. And just a note that these 3 scenarios actually, Mark, if you can go ahead and click on the 10%. Yeah, oh, there we go. And each one of these, again, what we're doing is maximizing the use of the Napa pipeline. And to the extent practical, we are also drawing, in some months, we're drawing higher out of the Stonebridge wells. But what this does, as you can see, is with a 10% reduction, we end up with over 100 acre feet of cushion in the Bell Canyon Reservoir. Mark, if you can go to 20%. This is the same scenario where if we go through a 20% reduction in consumption, we end up with slightly over 250 acre feet of excess water in the Bell Canyon Reservoir at the end of the year. And then on the 30%, we end up with a scenario of about a little over 420 acre feet. One of the things that I wanted to point out is, again, this is assuming we have a maximum allocation of 600 acre feet per year. I don't know whether Mark is going to touch on this a little bit later, but we have recently had discussions with the county, or excuse me, the city of Napa on potentially pulling an additional 200 acre feet. They've been informed by the state that the state is actually cutting back on allocations, additional allocations. So this analysis shows that 600 acre feet is the amount that we are going to have available from Napa. We may have more, there may be additional, but we didn't want to assume that because honestly, we're not sure whether that's going to be available. So the end result of this, a couple things. Number one, as I mentioned, we went into the phase 2 emergency in October, and based on the presentation that was at one of the last city council meetings by Raftelli, they were looking at about a 29% reduction in water consumption if everybody took seriously and implemented the phase 2 water emergency allocations.
Mr. Wenger, I'm seeing Councilmember Hall with a hand up. I'd like to just jump in.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Wenger, one quick question. So Napa pipeline right now, 67 acre feet actually includes that 200 additional acre feet.
It does through the end of this year, and then we would have to look at the ability of whether we get rain to refresh the pool in Bell Canyon. But what these analyses show is pulling as hard as we can off of the Napa pipeline to save as much as we can by November, And then after the November timeframe, we would look at backing off, pulling that amount from the Napa pipeline. It is a little bit of a scary scenario, honestly, because we're pulling as much as we can, as early as we can in the year to make sure that we preserve as large of a pool of Bell Canyon. But there is a little bit of a risk to that for sure. Anyways, as I was saying, the good news for the council and the public to know is that based on recent meter reading information we've received in January, February, and March, we have actually saved 30% per month out of typical water consumption. So kudos to the public for taking seriously the phase 2 emergency. If we are successful in maintaining 30% less water consumption for the remainder of the year, as compared to usage that we see in the average month, we will actually be in pretty good shape with respect to having sufficient capacities in Bell Canyon Reservoir to allow us to be in the best possible position if we end up going through another drought year. So the potential for continuation of the drought next year, it's anybody's best guess. I haven't looked at long range forecasting, but certainly what staff is recommending here in order to put us in the best position is that to the extent possible, we maximize the use of Napa water, maximize the use of the well field, and leave as much as possible in the Bell Canyon Reservoir for next year. The bottom line to making this all successful without having to implement the phase 3 requirements is conservation. And if the public can continue to conserve at a 30% reduction each month, that will get us through. But this is a critical enough scenario that we are going to be looking at this about every other week, and certainly once a month. We would be able to update the figures that are shown in the spreadsheets and make sure that we're on the right track. And if we get any indication that we are not remaining on the right track, we will definitely be back in front of the council talking about this again. And we'll most likely be providing you updates every month with that. So with that, that ends my analysis, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Appreciate the work, Mr. Wenger, and also from Councilmember Hall. Very much appreciate your analysis. And then from also Mr. Beltran and Mr. Church, getting everybody's eyes on this and focused. I'm seeing Mr. Hall with a hand, or Councilmember Hall with a hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Wenger, thank you very much. I was wondering, one thing we can include on this going forward is a forecast of rain for 6 months past the end of the calendar year, whatever it is, maybe just 3 or 4 months past. But if we could come up with a conversion factor, inches of rain to acre feet in the reservoir, what does that look like? And then how much rain do we need to fill the reservoir to a safe level? And we might be able to better assess whether we think we're going to get that much rain or not. Just a thought. It's another way to, push a little bit further out.
That's a great suggestion. We can do that.
So I'm going to go in just a moment to Councilmember Hardy. I just had one other thought here. So the bad news is that we are looking at limited resources, but at least presently the good news is if we stay very, very focused, we can keep stability through this season into next. And so that is at least giving us some working room. And so that's appreciated to understand that with this analysis. And so I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. Number of things come to mind at this point. First of all, just looking at the existing ordinance, I had that on another screen here. Ah, yes, criteria for establishing phase 3. The volume of water anticipated to be available prior to the next November 1st from all potable water sources is not sufficient to meet the projected demands through November 1st without demand reduction measures beyond the phase 2 reductions being implemented. I call that out because I see a significant flaw just in the way those restrictions are structured. The assumption that's implied by that language is that if we get to November 1st, everything is fine because it's going to rain a lot. So, I mean, amending the ordinance is obviously a task for another day, but I think it's critical that we do that at the appropriate time so that we have a set of policies in place that don't assume that the next rainy season is going to be wonderful.
Councilmember Hardy, I completely concur. I think the problem with the way the ordinance is written is it assumes we're going to have a deluge in November and December. I mean, our issue is we're not going to turn on another pipe and suddenly have water. The issue is we have to rely on rain to fill the canyon. And that's a big what if.
So we have this major structural flaw in the ordinance. I wanted to call that out because that goes to my next thought, and this has been covered to some extent already, but I think it's very important for us to extend those projections, as already discussed, at least to about a year from now, to March or April of 2022, and to add in some assumptions about the next rainy season. And of course, that can be done with a number of different projections. But I also want to say in that regard that there is no consistent correlation between rainfall and runoff because so much depends on the rainfall pattern. We get much more runoff when the ground is saturated than when it's not. And so having concentrated rainfall is very good for runoff. Having it spread out thin is not good for runoff. I'm not sure what the most efficient way to model things would be, as I don't have a clear grasp of the kind of data that's available to Mr. Wenger, but I'm hoping that we could calculate how much runoff went into the reservoir last rainy season, as an example, and then project what things look like if the next rainy season is as poor as the last one. And we can make more optimistic assumptions as well. But my biggest concern at this point isn't where are we going to be November 1st, 2021. It's where are we going to be April 1st, 2022? Because I think we need to have that outcome in view in making decisions this summer about how much conservation we need to achieve in order to have enough water next April to get through the summer of 2022. And along with this, I've been thinking about how we structure the emergency regulations themselves. And we have, for the most part, a per capita value for residential users, right? The restrictions in phase 2 and phase 3 are based on the number of persons per household, plus in the summer months, an additional allowance for irrigation. Whereas on the commercial side, we have a sort of blanket percentage reduction that applies to all commercial users. We have seen, and we are still seeing, the effects on our local businesses of the combined, really disruptions, it's too mild a word, of pandemic and fire. I'm very much concerned that we keep in mind that this drought-related water emergency is yet another crisis / disruption with the potential to have adverse consequences for our businesses, just as we're hoping to, really revitalize our business community. And at the same time, I'm reminded that that's also essential for municipal revenue. And so protecting our water supply has consequences for revenue and vice versa, because we need to do a lot of outreach to make sure that everyone understands what they can do and what the importance is. This water emergency is yet another extra demand on our staff resources at a time when our revenues are limited. So I'm very keen on thinking about these things as holistically as we can. And protecting our ability to supply enough water to our business community so that business can do all of the things that we need our business community to do and that they wish to do, I think really underlines for me the importance of reducing outdoor use and keeping that under control. Indoor use, I think, is actually pretty manageable. And I think we can conserve successfully on indoor use, but we have to be very, very conscious of the importance of conserving on irrigation use. So those are my thoughts for the moment.
Thank you. Very astute comments and appreciated. I think the concept that water is a prime equity component of all our business and residential investment, and we really only fully realize the value when we have less of it. So it's keeping our focus on how this is interconnected is important. I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring with a hand up.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. Has anyone actually seen where the language is with respect to the 25% holdback for emergency purposes? Is that actually stated in our permit? And if it is, are there any allowances for emergencies other than fire, like a lack of water? In other words, is there something that says, well, you can go down to 20% or something like that because of extreme circumstances where we can't? I'm not recommending that we go below 25%, but if we have to, we should at least analyze that. I've never seen that permit language. I just heard this number 25%. So we need to confirm that. I understand that we may have some limitations with respect to purchasing more water from the city of Napa through the State Water Project, which is going to cut back water. But Lake Hennessy has 31,000 acre feet capacity, and we should at least have that conversation with the city of Napa. That's another source of water above and beyond the State Water Project. I do think that I'm a little leery that conservation is going to be the way to get out of this, although obviously we have to push for that. I do think we also need to balance that with being nimble right now with our partners to the north and the south to purchase more water. even if it costs us, even if we're buying that water, we may not need it. I just think that this is too close of a call to rely just on conservation.
Thank you. And I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Vice Mayor Dorney, I concur. I think if there's a way, you know, I don't know how firm that 25% is. On the other hand, I also think we could look at the wells. That's a self-imposed cap that we have come up as a community. I don't know if it was considered during time of emergency or not, but clearly there's available water in the aquifer below us. I would prefer to explore pumping more from those wells. I don't know how much more we could pump, but pumping more from those wells rather than pull more from the limited supply in the reservoir simply because the reservoir is quicker to get to as we head into fire season again. So I would look to the wells first, then the reservoir, but buying more from our neighbors or other jurisdictions or partnering in other ways, providing services for water, whatever we need to do, you know, let's turn over every stone we can.
Thank you. I certainly concur with that. I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. It's just a question I have, and I don't know if staff has the answer because I didn't ask it ahead of time. But it just came to mind right now. I was wondering if there's a way that the state can help us in not posing those limitations, like from Napa or the other jurisdictions, given that they our fire situation and how more water was needed to take from Bell Canyon, and that was such an unusual situation, and we could be facing it again. So I wonder if there's not a way to get state help in this situation.
Mark, do you have any thoughts on that, or Mr. Wenger? And then I'll come back to
I would not be optimistic myself. We've had a number of conversations with the state to try to understand and identify how much water was used from swimming pools, fire hydrants, reservoirs, and the finance director can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the answer is we're unable to determine what that number is. And we've tried to tie that in. But because this is a statewide drought and the numbers taken probably in relationship to the challenges the state's encountering are going to be smaller in scale, I think we're going to have a challenge with having that conversation with the state, and perhaps Mr. Wenger will have a comment on that as well.
Yes, it's a question that hasn't been asked yet, but based on the feedback, when the city of Napa requested additional water from the state project, what they passed on to us is that the state is cutting back on everyone. So it's worth asking the question, but I wouldn't, I would be pretty doubtful that we would end up getting any additional.
Thank you. And I'll come to Councilmember Hardy in just a moment. I do want to mention one thing on wells. I'm wondering is the sort of looking at, we've recognized with the Stonebridge wells, there may be some sensitivity in terms of proximity to the river. And I'm wondering if as we consider that also, are there less sensitive areas that may be considered? Just a thought. So I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. First, I just want to confirm that I have a correct understanding that the 25% reservation is just a matter of city policy. And is there anyone on staff who can confirm that for me?
I can take a quick shot at that. There were safe yield report, and you can give me 1 second here. There were 3 reports that I reviewed in the last few days, and I can tell you that there was mention in those reports, and it was I believe the report was done by West Yost, if I'm not mistaken, but there were recommendations made in there about maintaining minimum pools of water. The other thing I will say is in some of the reports that I read, there were indications that more than 450 acre feet was pulled out of the Stonebridge well, and I believe that was in a safe yield report. There have been times where there's been over 500 acre feet pulled from the wells. So there is a capability, and I do believe it's more in line with what the safe yield report, and that's where the 450 acre feet of the Stonebridge wells came from. The other thing I will mention is that in my quick review of those documents, there was also mention of the aquifer under the St. Helena area was, I can't think of the right words, but it was fairly robust, and the report was recommending consideration of potential additional wells. So a lot of the information that are in those reports, I need to go over a little bit closer, but there is information in there indicating that we do have other options in the future. Now, granted, these would be longer term options, and whether they're totally viable, and we'd have to go through and look, but just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. I just, while we were meeting here this morning, I was able to pull up the original State Water Resources Control Board permit for Bell Canyon from 1965. I don't see any minimum storage requirements there. I don't know if that permit has been amended since then. That's more than I can do quickly here, but I am also reminded on the subject of wells and well locations that in the past, and I think this occurred in the mid-70s, it was something that was discussed in my first term on the council when we went through a water shortage in the early 90s. Back in the mid-70s, the city received water from at least one, perhaps more, privately owned wells here in the city, and one in particular, which I believe is in the vicinity of Dean York Fir Hill, has always been reported as producing something on the order of 200 gallons per minute. So it does seem to me that longer term, we would be well advised to consider, look for opportunities to construct a municipal well or wells in locations that are not so sensitive with respect to surface flows in the Napa River. That's a longer term project, but I want to plant that seed of thought while we're on the subject. And, you know, our current policy with respect to use of the Stonebridge wells is, again, that's a self-imposed limit, if you will, of 400 acre feet per year. Our management and use of the wells today does need to be informed, I think, by the concerns reflected in the public trust doctrine. And those concerns don't preclude additional reliance on the wells when that's what we have to do to prevent adverse consequences for the people of St. Helena, but we need to make those decisions very thoughtfully. And while I agree wholeheartedly with Vice Mayor Doring that we should be doing all we can to secure additional sources of water, I think the current situation is something fairly typical of severe droughts, especially in the second year. the problem is widespread. The challenges, in fact, are large enough to affect both the Central Valley Project deliveries, which are Federal Bureau of Reclamation deliveries, and the state water system deliveries. The bottom line being that generally speaking, if we're in a severe water crisis, so is everyone else, to one degree or another. And for sure, most large providers become very careful about their commitments. In past drought scenarios, the tendency of the state water system has been to take a very conservative approach coming into the summer and announcing very dramatic cutbacks. Some years they're actually able to deliver more than initially projected. I think they take the approach where they'd rather set expectations lower than necessary than set them higher than realistic. But all that said, I think what it means is even while we look for additional sources of water, we have to base our decisions on the assumption that we don't get any until we do. And so we may not, in the end, have to rely as much on conservation as we're projecting, but I think we're projecting it the way we need to. And my only caveat there, as already explained, is that I think we need to be looking ahead, considering the possibility of another very low rainfall year, and project to April 1 and make sure that we're conserving enough that we can make it through another dry winter. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to open it up to public comment at this point, if there are no other council comments at this point, and see if there's any public comment.
Okay, I do see some public comment. I'm going to allow Mark, first name, to speak.
Hello there, everybody. This is Mark Smithers. Appreciate all your hard work on a very difficult topic here. Obviously, something we probably should have been more concerned with in the past, but now it's here. I have a few comments and questions. They're all garbled together from looking at the staff report. I guess I throw out there the idea of, and we don't know, I guess, or maybe some people know exactly what the numbers are, but we have some very, very large water users. And I believe probably, I'm going to guess, the top 3 water users are Behringer, Charles Krug, and Sutter Home. And I don't know to what extent the city has reached out to them to see what they can do to reduce their water use. Obviously we're asking the residents to do it, we're asking other businesses to do it, but I think that some of those 3 businesses and very, very large water users that maybe are on the same scale of them, which I wouldn't know who they would be, I think they have some opportunities to where they could really cut back water use and water pulls from the city. I know one of them has a water treatment facility on its property that actually can treat the water to drinkability. And I don't know that they actually then reuse that water. I think they've been afraid to reuse that water because they don't want their customers to find out they're cleaning their stainless steel tanks and their barrels with treated water, even though the water is completely drinkable. So I think the city should reach out to the very largest of customers and see what they may be able to do to reduce their water use, which would then make more water available to the city, the residents and other businesses. I don't know, I haven't heard you guys, I know this was thrown out at one time before, and the hospital has a big well that's also, prolific as far as I understand, and very close to Bell Canyon. And I don't know if we reached out to the hospital at all about purchasing water from them. I do have the same questions as to where this 25% reserve comes from, which you guys have all talked about already. I don't know how this is where I run into a little bit of a difficulty is we've given, and I think Paul referred to this, that we're giving caps, or maybe Lester, we're giving caps to residences saying you can only use so much water per person. And with businesses, we're just asking them to reduce. And it seems a little, I mean, if you have a business that's been wasteful, you know, in the past, they sort of get a benefit because they've been wasteful, versus residences have to just deal with the cap. There's also, I guess, I have concerns with the residential discussion because, for instance, like here at our household, we were 2,000 gallons under our allotment for the last several months, each month. And so we've been conserving significantly. Do we get a credit then in the future, like in the summer, so that we can use that water that we've saved up? I mean, it's kind of like net metering with electricity. You know, do I get a credit then because I was so good in the wintertime, you know, and using barrels and buckets and using buckets into my toilet, you know, so that I didn't use city water? Do I get a credit then? I think that's something that's worth asking. But I have a really big concern about the summer allotment, where you're going to add, I think, 2,500 gallons per household for landscaping. And I understand this is really, this is my last comment. This is really, really difficult. I mean, I don't know how you do each individual, but some folks, I mean, they have no landscaping at all, zero. And that person can now be wasteful and take a 30-minute shower if they want to, because they got an extra 2,500 gallons of water. Versus some people have fruit trees and they're growing gardens and they're, you know, producing food. I mean, it seems one size can't fit all. Anyway, I've got more comments, but I'll cut it off because I guess that's 4 minutes.
Yeah, thank you for the comments, and please, if you send in as well, then we can inventory those concerns as well. So appreciate it. Cami, are we seeing additional public comment?
I am checking for any additional raised hands, and I do not see any at this time.
Okay, very good. I'll bring it back.
Oh. Actually, so sorry. Someone did raise their hand. Nancy Durbin, I'm going to allow you to speak.
Good morning, everybody. I just want to make a couple of comments. I think the state is saying no across all counties because we have been classified as a pyro state. And if you recall, I mean, our fires are not unique to our area. This whole state has been burning on a pretty regular basis. In some areas, far worse than ours, actually. So I see where the state is taking drastic measures because it's a drastic situation. And I want to kind of build on what Councilmember Hardy brought up about looking beyond just this year. Climate scientists are evaluating whether or not we are now actually in a mega drought, which happens every so many centuries. And if indeed we are, which all indicators are pointing in that direction, even if we have a somewhat good year, the odds of continuing droughts coming closer together and being more severe and lasting longer are elevating every day. So we need to go beyond just dealing with what we're dealing with at the moment and have a little bit more forward thinking, I feel, if we're gonna survive, because this is not just a 2021-22 issue. We have climate change, and it's undeniable, and it's getting worse globally, and we are not exempt, no matter how sweet and well off we are as a little community. we're not going to get any benefits that anybody else isn't getting. So I hope if it comes down to when we're scraping the bottom of the barrel for water, what are we going to use the water for? Are we going to use it to make sure our tourists are comfortable and we can take a shower? Are we going to make sure we have enough water to fight the fires so our town doesn't burn down? That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there additional public comment?
I
Okay,
am checking to see if there's any additional public comment. I don't see any at this time.
Very good. So I'll bring it back to the council. I've got a few comments, but I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring. I'll let him go here.
Just another question to clarify. You know, it's very confusing to me, and it's going to be confusing for, you know, the rest of us as policymakers to keep track of these water figures when we're constantly changing what the actual water year is, whether it's a fiscal year or an annual year. So my understanding is that we've always measured it by July 1st, right? And then going forward, but yet a lot of the calculations are based on an annual year starting in January. And it's, one example would be the, you know, the purchases from Napa. Is my assumption correct that we are starting a new year, July 1st with Napa, for example? Okay, because that's important to know. And so I think when we present this data, I think it's easier for all of us to kind of pick one year because depending on where you are in a year, it affects your calculation. So that would be helpful, at least for me.
Yes, just to confirm, it is a fiscal year with respect to the purchases from Napa. I think what also complicates the conversation in that respect is that with the calculations for how we determine these phased emergencies, and particularly with phase 3, we're talking about a November 1st deadline. And so one of the screens that I'll share shortly when we move into the next phase of the presentation is just how many, it answers that question, what's our goal? How many acre feet do we need to save between now and November 1st or the end of the year in order to ensure that we don't move into a phase 3 methodology? But I think that calculation alone sort of invites, you know, that's more of a calendar year issue with respect to years versus this fiscal year. And so I think sometimes we're going to have to talk about both fiscal year and calendar years.
Thank you. I couldn't come up with the word calendar year. That's what I meant, the comparison.
I think that's an excellent observation and point. I have just a few comments and then I'll hand it back to Mark to get us into the next phase. Recognizing this balance, we have residents, we have businesses here, both all that is integral to our community. And so finding those balances, we want to recognize that that our residents need their allotment for the range that they need. Our businesses also have a range that they need. And so that conversation, my understanding from looking at the staff report, is on April 8th. There'll be a discussion with the business community to understand a little bit more about their observations about the potential penalties, et cetera. So that can be further discussed. Is that correct, Mark?
Right. Our finance director will touch on that shortly, and we are scheduling a time with the Chamber of Commerce for a Zoom meeting on the 8th.
Okay, because those balances are really important. It's, you know, I sort of use the analogy of a drip irrigation line where you have large trees and small flowers on the same line, and you've got to make sure everybody gets their equitable range of water. Not everybody needs the same amount, but they need a range to keep them in their zone. On the pumping, I know in the county, you know, sort of policy has looked at municipalities and using groundwater. There's been a sort of a prioritization for ag with county policy. I think as we look at perhaps needing to pump in perhaps less sensitive areas, also, understanding and maybe talking about the basis of those county policies so that we make sure if we're making decisions that that there's an understanding of why, and then that dialogue also with the county, with the other jurisdictions, with the other water providers in Napa County. I think there could be benefits to understanding how we use water and distribute it both residentially and business wise to find balances. If we're all, walking through this scenario together, how do we make sure we all get through and that the penalties, fines, et cetera, don't push one group or sector out? So with that, I'll give it back to Mark to lead us forward.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm going to share my screen first, and then I'm going to invite, I believe, Director Mitz to share her screen or the city clerk on some water conservation tips. But we're going to focus briefly on conservation before transitioning to a preview of our next council meeting. So I'm now sharing my screen for this is the 30% reduction target. So what I've highlighted, this is just that average use. This is the 5 years of average monthly use by source. And what we're focusing on is column G here. This is the total usage each month. And I've highlighted the months the April here and beyond where the usage really starts to jump from this winter time use number. We're about to jump into the 8th most heaviest use months of the year beginning now. And so this is really the time when it warms up, people begin using outdoor irrigation, watering lawns, etc. And the opportunities to reduce water are significant from this point forward. And frankly, it's imperative that we're thinking not just inside on conservation, but absolutely looking to our lawns and reducing outdoor irrigation. That is going to be the key, and we can fall far behind if we're only conserving 5 or 10% of outdoor irrigation. We're not going to meet these targets, so it needs to be indoor and outdoor conservation. And if there's a headline that shows up in the newspaper as a result of this meeting, I'm hopeful that it will emphasize how important reducing outdoor irrigation this summer is going to be. But this is the target that we're looking for. So to shoot for a target, the staff report rounds this number to the nearest 25. So 425 acre feet is our goal, which would allow, if I scroll down just below here, this allows us to end up with a figure over 400 acre feet in Bell Canyon by the end of the year. So our goal is a 30% reduction. We'll be reporting on how this is trending and sharing this with the community on a regular basis. Now I'm going to invite one of our staff members to share just some conservation tips. These are included in the staff report, in a table in the staff report, and also there is an attachment to the staff report. We're just going to look at page this, but this is a document that will continue to share with our community. And this identifies a number of different water conservation tips, from landscaping changes to car washing, showering, bathing, toileting, dishwasher, and even brushing teeth. It includes guidance on efficient use, and it includes guidance on conservation. But if you look at the top right of this form, the opportunities to reduce average residential water use, more than half of that is associated with outdoor landscaping. So this is really the takeaway. This is so key. These other opportunities are identified here below. They're very important, but outside landscaping is really key. And to that end, the city this past week implemented phase 3 water emergency regulations would require everyone to turn off outdoor irrigation. And so the city did implement that in our parks in anticipation that this analysis could potentially move us into a phase 3. So we can turn back on that water in a reduced way. We can pick a park or two that maybe stays green, or we can allow the parks to go from green to gold this summer. But at the moment, they are turned off as a water conservation measure. And I will be interested in the council's feedback on, we haven't calculated the approximate acre feet that would save, and perhaps that's an important consideration, but I am going to be interested in the council's feedback on whether you are comfortable with the continuation of turning off irrigation at our parks, and that has an impact on ball fields as well. So something we can come back to a little bit later. So now I'm going to invite Director Mitz to provide a preview of our meeting this on April 13th.
Great, thank you very much. So the meeting that is going to be coming on April 13 does have to do with the implementation of the penalty phases for wasteful water use. Just as a refresher for anyone who wasn't at the last meeting, the last City Council meeting, Raftellus did provide their recommendations on what an appropriate penalty structure would be. The recommendation that was provided to City Council was a tiered volumetric. And so what that penalty structure did, it allows for, if anybody has 0 to 25% over their allocation, 25 to 50%, 50 to 100%, and over 100%, to be charged a different rate. And the thought behind that particular type of penalty structure is that it minimizes the penalties for those that might be barely over what their allocation is, you know, somewhere in that 0 to 25% range, that they're charged $10 per HCF over. And that's something that could easily be corrected within the next month's rating, as opposed to maybe a user who's very egregious and just, I don't care, I'm still going to water everything, I'm still going to use water the way I want to. And so it penalizes that tier a little bit higher. And so there are definitely fiscal impacts for the penalty structure, as well as the overall impacts to the city's revenues. Some of the fiscal impact is outlined in the staff report that was presented to City Council today. And it was also outlined in the last staff report to City Council on March 23rd, and will also be reiterated in the council meeting on the 13th. So some of the initial fiscal impacts that we know about is the drought rates. So effective phase 1 emergency, once that was triggered, drought rates did go into effect on the per cost per HCF, and that is 6% higher than non-drought rates. There's also a reference to the decrease in consumption. While we do want to encourage water conservation, because this, you know, as you saw from the presentation from Mr. Wanger, that if we have a decrease in consumption, that's obviously it's gonna decrease the amount of revenues that the city needs to have in order to just fulfill the basic operations, as well as capital, you know, very important capital improvement projects. So we do recognize that as soon as we do get more conservation, that our revenues are going to decrease. And right now, it's important to note that is also compounded with the effects that we have in COVID. You know, we have seen a decrease in people paying their, you know, sorry, I'm trying to use the right words. We have seen a decrease in, or an increase in people as far as being behind in their payments for their water wastewater rates. Additional cost for staff is going to be additional staffing and outreach to be able to implement these phase 2 water restrictions. We are currently in discussion with an outreach consultant that can help us to spread this water conservation, you know, with water conservation measures. The other thing is the penalty structure. Obviously, what we want to do is any penalties that are collected by the city, they will be designated for the water fund. And then what we want to do with those funds is definitely look at the longer term, as was mentioned today. We do want to look at what are some longer term things that we can do. And we want to specifically designate those penalties that are collected for that. Such things can be purple pipe, the tertiary treatment, which we're actively working on. It could also potentially be looking at the automated measuring devices, which is something that was in the last rate structure and was pulled off, but that's something that we can specifically designate some of the penalties that are collected to actually start implementing those particular devices within the city. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We are doing outreach to the business community. As Mark mentioned earlier, we are set up with the chamber for a meeting next week. To Mr. Smithers' point earlier, I have actually been in active conversations with one of the large wineries on what are some things that we could potentially be working with them and what can they be doing to be able to reduce some of their water usage. So those are active conversations that we've been doing on the back end. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Appreciate that. One of the comments that I'll make is that certainly our community is sensitive to what happened the last time we had to go into these types of restrictions. And then with the excellent measures of conservation, water rates did go up because the system had not been receiving as much funding. So I think part of the messaging to the community, if we can get attractive, good messaging about conservation, we also need to be working on what are our strategies so that we have a better back end on this in terms of how we finance our water department, et cetera. So there's not the surprise that occurred last time once everybody stepped up and did what was expected, only to find a back end that was very unpleasant. So if there's a way that we can sort of dual track as we promote conservation, but also look at all the strategies we have to make sure that our community is not saddled with something that they can't manage financially. So with that, I'm seeing Councilmember Hall and then Councilmember Chateau.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had one thought when we were looking at the flyer for residential conservation. I'm thinking in the future, it'd be great to have something for commercial. I know businesses, they could hopefully share best practices or through the chamber because they have done a lot with water conservation just because of the cost of water. So if somebody's not aware of those, it would be great to share that information as we all work on this together and keep learning as we track it more. So that's one thought. And then the second thought I had, you asked about our green spaces and our public parks. So I would want to know how much water it takes before making a decision. But my first thought is that it would be important to keep at least some parks green or a park green because there's been so many mental health challenges, especially with our youth during COVID and people getting out to the public spaces. And I would prefer the message to be that we all put the zero-scaping in our homes and you could still have a nice public space to use and run around and play Little League or whatever it is, soccer, what you like to do in certain places, if we can do that. I realize how severe this emergency is, so I'm always open to that. But I wanted to, if we can keep that up for kids, weight gain, I don't know if I mentioned that, that's also been a real issue with kids and it has direct health benefits. We want to get them out for all of us, for their future health, for everything, having them succeed in life. So that's my thought.
Thank you.
It would be helpful for me to just highlight one of the comments about the business side. I think one of the benefits we have of looking back in recent years to the other severe drought just a few years ago in the state of California is that there are a number of really good lessons from the experiences with that. And for example, with hotels and towels, hotels produced documentation that would share and invite the guests to postpone the laundering of towels. And if that was chosen or selected as an option, it could save X number of gallons. So I think we can work with our hotels on approaches to conservation that help the consumer make choices there that's good on behalf of the environment and the city. And with restaurants, invite our restaurants in particular to not just automatically offer that glass of water, but wait for the customer to request a glass of water. So there are a lot of examples that I think we'll be wanting to work with our Chamber of Commerce on. And thank you for the comments on the parks as well.
Thank you. And I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. I want to go back briefly to the earlier presentation on projections, water use, water demand, and the way in which city managers presented the effect of conservation and our conservation targets. It's certainly informative to see things expressed in terms of percentage reduction, in comparison with the 5-year average, but would really, I think, be very helpful to have the absolute number as well. So, what does that mean in terms of what our target for total water use is month by month? Because that's the value that we're actually going to need to measure to in order to monitor our progress. It's not really so much how much are we conserving as compared to any particular moment in the past, but are we conserving enough to keep our demand at a certain level? So having that absolute value would be useful. That prompts me to think about, what our opportunities are to see how we're doing. I am concerned that if, we're only reporting out on this monthly, as an example, between now and November 1st, there are only 6 opportunities for a review and a consideration of whether we need to adjust. So while I recognize what I propose may create a significant additional burden for staff, I still think there's a lot of value in having updates at each regularly scheduled meeting. I'm assuming that, the measurements are available, but on the, supply demand side, I know we're metering the water that goes through the treatment plant at Bell Canyon. So we don't have to measure customer meters in order to know how much demand there is on the water treatment plant. So I'm thinking there is going to be information available there, and I'm hoping and assuming that we can check at any time on how much we've pumped through the Rutherford pump station from the city of Napa. Similarly, that we can measure as often as we wish on the output at the Stonebridge wells. So I'm hoping that we can actually get an update more frequently. We may get to a point where we're doing so well that seems unnecessary, but especially at the beginning, when we're in the process of educating our water customers and doing the outreach, I think more frequent feedback is going to make it easier for us to know whether we're doing enough, both in terms of the outreach and communication and in terms of the end result in conservation. On the subject of outreach to large users, in a perfect world, and again, I don't want to assume too much about our resources, but I think we should be reaching out to all our large users. It's great that we have a conversation going with one, but the potential for large savings is obviously biggest there. So So I think that's really important. And at the same time, and I'm referring back to Mark Smithers' excellent comments, you know, there is no perfect way to write a set of rules like this in terms of tailoring the outcomes to fit individual circumstances. That's far too complex and burdensome. So, you know, whether we've oversimplified things or not, I think we have to move forward recognizing, and this, I think this needs to be part of our messaging, that we understand that individual circumstances, whether it's on the residential side or on the commercial side, may require some exemption, exception, whatever it is we wish to call it. In thinking about commercial users, it seems to me pretty clear that different types of businesses have different needs and different opportunities to conserve. Restaurants are going to look different from wineries, are going to look different from office buildings. And in all cases, it's going to make a big difference whether there's significant landscaping or none, or something in between. So we do have the percentage rule in the ordinance, and that's the rule we have. But again, as part of the messaging, I think we need to let people know we recognize that there are going to be situations where the rule we have doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the individual circumstance. With respect to water rates and Mayor Ellsworth's comments on the impact of conservation on rates, I know that the outcome of our last rate adjustment was in fact a price hike, if you will, during water emergencies. So we've done something to reduce the potential for rate shock coming out of a drought situation. But I'm under the impression from the finance director's report that that additional charge may not be enough in the current situation. So I am concerned about that and wondering if we have any way at this point to calculate or estimate how big a shortfall we're looking at potentially. And finally, with respect to sources of guidance for businesses on you know, how to survive or thrive with limited water, I'm reminded of you know, the situation in Mendocino where water is in short supply perpetually. And that would be true in Bolinas as well. We have in some of our small coastal communities visitor-oriented businesses that have adapted successfully to a very limited water supply, and perhaps that's some additional source of information. And Bolinas in particular, they're both hotels and restaurants, lots of visitor serving uses, and the entire community on a very limited water supply. So they're very conservation conscious there. And those are my thoughts for now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do also what you mentioned in the beginning in terms of information coming out more often than monthly. I think if we're getting the data and it's out there, will keep us on track to understand it in more real time as we're going forward. I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regard to that point, I was just thinking if there's a way staff can refresh that update regularly just on the website. I think while we operate as a council here, our methods of operating are somewhat cumbersome from time to time and difficult for the rest of the community to actually plug into what we're doing here. Maybe that's by design at times, but certainly an issue like this, any ideas we have, any updates we have on how we are progressing, since obviously there's a billing cycle as well, and getting penalties out, if there's a way folks can see a little bit more, not necessarily real time, but maybe it's a weekly update, I don't know, on a website on how we're doing as a community. Also, with regard to taking responsibility for your own actions, you know, Councilmember Shoto had a nice social media update yesterday, I believe, by a simple installation of a live real-time water monitor on her own home. And it's a simple tool you can do for $200. Everybody can get it. And you can, you know, it's just a simple app like any other app that we use to monitor our lives these days. You can look at real time, how are you doing in your own home or in your own business, day in and day out, hour by hour, minute by minute with your water conservation. So I think there's a number of things we can do there. Going back to Ms. Shoto, Councilmember Shoto's questions about city lawns. While we were talking, I jumped on Google Earth, and it looks like the two ballparks at Crane Park, just beyond the end of the bocce courts there, those two combined use basically about 16 acre feet per year is what I estimate. Per year, 16 acre feet. It's about 56 gallons per square foot for a typical lawn. So I don't know if Carlos or Clayton or somebody can estimate that across the board for the parks, but at least it would give an indication of city use in our parks. And to her comments, maybe there's a park that we leave green, sort of the safe zone, and we decide to let other things turn brown. I think the city has sizable lawn acreage that could help with this conservation effort. And then back to the conversation about rates. Councilmember Hardy, I completely agree. I think we need to, we went through this before and it sort of caught the community off guard, and there were you know, significant changes in direction, I think. And so let's get smarter this time around. Let's start our rate analysis sooner rather than later. You know, even though it's on a calendar for a year and a half from now or 2 years from now, let's just engage in it right now while we're focused on it and get that conversation going, and just keep it present and in front of the community, and look at rate adjustments as happening every other year if needed. The other thing, this is such a dire conversation. It's such a downer, you know, for a community, not just our community, obviously, but for the entire West Coast here. On the flip side, remember that we're innovative individuals. The city of San Diego has a desalinator, and you know, they took it offline for a couple of years because they didn't need it. It's back online now. We are sitting on the shore of the largest geographic feature on this planet, which is the Pacific Ocean. At some point, the cost to the community will be so high, the investment in a desalinator down here at San Pablo Bay will become obvious. So let's just stay focused on short-term conservation efforts, doing what we can with our neighbors, and keep a long-term objective on this whole issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, I want to support that, some of those concepts. You know, we have our industries here are thirsty industries in the beverage industry, hospitality, but they're also very innovative industries. if we look at places like Israel and Australia that have been dealing with these dry issues for a considerable amount of time, the look at desalination plants, the look at what are our other resources out there, if we can be innovative and forward thinking. So we've got that long-term track as well. And that may be a great place to engage with our larger partners. You know, they have a real stake in this, and perhaps their innovations in their industries can also lead into these water issues, and we can work together regionally on larger solutions like the desalination, et cetera. Are there any other council comments at this point? Mark, do you feel like you, I also want to support Councilperson Chateau's thought on the parks. We want to make sure that our community feels served. We may have to make some sacrifices in certain areas, but how do we do that in a considerate way to make sure that people feel supported and served here? I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Yeah, just a brief comment. I think we also have to keep in mind, you know, we are entering into fire season again. I know the business community doesn't like to hear that term, but that's what it is. And so there's an interplay between conservation of water and increasing the danger of fire, because you have less water to landscape. And so weeds are going to start to grow, trees are going to become a little bit more stressed. And so I think it would be important for us to really get a serious campaign going for in our city to create the defensible spaces we need around our homes. And especially in areas, you know, for example, outside of Vineyard Valley, in the creeks, they're overgrown with combustible material. I think we have to do some outreach on that side, because obviously if we can prevent fire, then we can reduce the amount of water that we would use. And we know from past history now that there's a fairly significant amount of water that was used. We can't calculate it. So I would just offer that for the community, so that we would get out flyers. Hey, you need to do these things for your yard, and not just the large landholders, but this, you know, just the normal single family homeowner can do some work on their property. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Councilperson Hardy. Oh, I think there's a mute.
Thank you. Sorry about the mute. Just wanted to share a couple things. One, I believe that clearing vegetation from the Napa River is actually in conflict with flood control regulations. So some of the things we might like to do in terms of fire protection for Vineyard Valley may be somewhere between difficult and impossible. It was a surprise to me, but I you know, following a conversation some months back with one of the Vineyard Valley residents, I made some inquiries about how one would go about a project like that. And that's when I discovered the conflict with the flood control regulations. So there was that. You know, in terms of city parks, I'm on board with the goal of maintaining some amount of green space, but you know, I really think the key is to keep the parks usable, which may not require keeping them absolutely green. They certainly need to be places everyone can use, but I'm a bit, well, in terms of optics, I think it's important for it to be clear that the city, like its businesses and its residences, is responding to the emergency. And brown lawns are a kind of obvious advertisement of one's buy-in to conservation, although they may not always be desirable or necessary. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more piece of messaging I think that needs to start getting into our mindset as well as conservation is just this concept of open flame and having people be considerate of whatever they're doing, whether it's with a small open flame or a larger open flame. All it takes is one accident, one spark in the wrong direction at the wrong time to create a disaster. And so I believe within our messaging, helping people keep that in mind as well. If we're moving into a very, very dry season, every bit we can do to minimize that risk is going to be important. Are there any other council comments? I'll go back to our city manager and see where we are in this conversation if we feel that we've got some tools here to move forward.
We have, and thank you for the feedback today. I'll work with our staff and we'll develop a strategy with our parks that we can share possibly on the 13th, as well as part of the other portion of our water conversation. And we'll look forward to communicating actively and perhaps real time on the website with the data on water conservation. It's going to be really important that we share that message this year. So the conversation's been very helpful to staff, and we're very thankful for the opportunity to communicate on this important topic.
Very good. And so I just want to thank everybody here for the incredible focus. This is such a serious subject, and the fact that we're all putting our thoughts in together is really important right now. So I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. Mark, so what did we agree? What are we doing? Are we saying our message is 30% reduction immediately going forward in the community? Are we doing that by declaring a phase 3 emergency? Are we going to monitor, wait and see, and regroup when we meet the strict standards of our ordinance?
Did Mark freeze? Mark might have frozen there.
So I think I'm freezing a moment.
Now we can hear you.
I'm freezing for just a moment, so I'll turn off my video. I think the question, okay, so the question was, what was the feedback and direction? The staff was not recommending pulling the trigger on a phase 3 emergency at this time, with the forecast that conservation, based on the methodology in code, we don't meet the trigger for a phase 3 yet. We're very close, but assuming the conservation measures continue at the phase 2 pace of 29-30%, conservation measures will leave 4 feet above that 25% surplus or the reserve, and allow us to avoid a phase 3 this year. But it's going to be very important that we monitor and encourage conservation, particularly outdoor landscaping. With respect to parks, I'll work with our staff at developing some form of a adjusted watering strategy that we can share that will perhaps I wouldn't anticipate bright green grass in our parks this year, but some substantially curtailed water use, and perhaps the opportunity to share the associated water savings that come with that, those changes. And we can also provide some additional messaging for our community on how to achieve substantial water savings while still keeping the grass alive and at people's homes. So, but of course, if anyone their lawn gold for the summer, we're not going to object to that. It will be an important conservation measure, and we'll work on the finance angle. I have more than 14 notes to follow up on, but we know that the council is interested in the financial impacts of the conservation. I do want to acknowledge that our staff, due to the COVID emergency and the reductions in revenue, every staff member at the city, we voluntarily reduced their salary, and that included our water and sewer prices. So we have had a little bit of a head start on saving some money in those funds this year. We did have those same staff worked a lot of overtime also due to some of the emergencies. So that was offset a little bit by the overtime, but we'll bring you some information on the financial aspects of this as well. And there are some important capital projects that, such as the Meadowood tanks, that will have some reimbursement on them, and I think that factors into the equations as well. So we'll bring you a complete financial analysis relatively soon.
And then our April 8th is that connection with the business community as well. And that the intent is to open those doors of communication. Is that my understanding?
Right. We want to raise awareness that the council will be considering a recommendation to establish a penalty structure on the meeting of April 13th. And so it's important that we share with them what that means and encourage them to take a look at what that means for their own operation. I will share with you that we've already committed to reaching out 10% of customer use, residential customer use accounts, as well as business and commercial accounts. So we'll be communicating specifically with those audiences to first alert them to the fact that they happen to be one of the, find themselves in the top 10% of customer use, and at the same time encourage them to take a hard look at ways they can conserve water.
Councilmember Hall, does that adequately give you a picture?
Thank you. It does. I just, my key point is to remind council that our ordinance is written through November or up to November, which is kind of strange. The real issue is the issue that Councilmember Hardy raised. We need further extension on the analysis to get us to April 1 or April 30 of next year. That's what we need to be able to see if this recommendation is enough. So in my mind, I'm thinking we're leaving this open until we see that analysis. I think if we run whatever it was, the 67 acre feet from Napa, we can only run 67 acre feet for 8 months. That takes us to February. So come February, if we don't get any rain in February, we've got a dry reservoir and our water from Napa is shut off. Both. So we need that analysis.
I'm certainly supportive of that.
Even with the 30% conservation, that might be the scenario. So I think we need to see that.
I concur that's critical to look out that distance. Mr. Presswich, do we have the ability to open that up?
Right, that's the next step in our analysis, is to look out to November 1 of 2022, run some analysis on what we think is going to happen when the water production from Napa moves down. The plan would be as we move into the hopefully rainfall season in November, December, that the well production increases when the water use from Napa decreases. So the hope is that those numbers can offset each other and we can pause the Napa pipe resources at that point so that we have some of that water available to get us through the remainder of June 22.
Okay, thank you. We have one more public comment from somebody who has not spoken yet. I'm going to reopen public comment to take that comment to see if there's anything additional there we need to consider.
Okay, phone number ending in 0418. I'm going to allow you to speak. And you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Good morning, Mayor, City Council members, and city staff. This is Rick Krebs, and I want to compliment you all on what an amazing job you've done in very serious circumstances. My issue is that you have just been addressing the usage issue and not addressing the matter of the 60.5 million gallons that's being wasted between the treatment centers and the water meters for each individual user. To me, in my opinion, that's rather like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. I think that in all of the efforts you're putting out, we also have to be very focused on a solution for a long-term remedy to the situation we're in. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you for the comment. We appreciate that. And that is an aspect that we are looking at as well. So we feel we have Mr. Wanger here, who's come on board with his team as our interim public works and looking at all aspects. So thank you. So with that, is there any additional public I'll close the public comment, seeing no additional. And is there any additional council comment before we sign off from this meeting? Seeing none, and I believe, Mr. Presswich, we have what we need. You have what you need from us. And I want to just once again thank everybody for this deep focus, and we'll move forward together, and we'll navigate through. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.
Did you boot the attendees?
I did. I just got them
Thank
out
you.
and I ended the recording. And then I'm going to go over to YouTube and end the stream.
Okay, I'm going to try to go